What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with a 100% spoiler-free review for part 1 of season 2 of Invincible. 4 new episodes are coming our way this Friday, November 3rd, and Amazon was kind enough in advance to send me a press screener to check it out. And part 2 apparently is coming in early 2024. And like many people out there, I really enjoyed season 1 overall, and I was shocked and amazed by the finale, where, much to my surprise and delight, the violence went way beyond or above and beyond the violence of the original comic. And I won't beat around the bush or make you wait for my official opinion. If you like season 1, there's a very good chance that you're locked to enjoy season 2. And even though I've only seen 4 episodes so far, I think season 2 might have a slight edge over season 1. And just in case you need a refresher, Invincible is created by Robert Kirkman, who not only created the comic book series Invincible, he also created the comic book series Walking Dead, which, in case you haven't gotten the memo, that show went on to be extremely popular. But I should also give credit to the artists Cory Walker and Ryan Otley, who drew the comic Invincible back in the day. But here's the tricky part of my recommendation. How do you recommend a superhero show to people at a time where a lot of people seem to be completely, totally checked out on the superhero genre overall? And I totally get it. I hate the phrase superhero fatigue because what the phrase superhero fatigue implies is that all superhero shows and comics and movies, that they're all created equal and that you're either into them or you're not. And that's total nonsense. If you've ever read superhero comics or watched superhero shows or watched superhero movies, you'll be the first to acknowledge there's an incredibly wide range out there when it comes to the overall quality of these various adaptations. And I think what's killing the superhero genre right now is a lack of quality. I mean, there have been so many awful shows and movies lately. It wouldn't surprise me if a lot of people out there are like, I never want to hear the word superhero ever again unless they're talking about like Christmas presents for like their 5-year-old nephews. But here's the reality. Invincible Season 2 is vastly superior to most of the output of Marvel and DC right now. And even though all the momentum seems to be going toward the demise of the superhero genre in film and television, nonetheless, shows like this could continue to thrive. Going back to the 1930s, there are so many incredible comic book series that have yet to be adapted. And if filmmakers and TV producers would actually read some of these legendary arcs, well, then they might find an inexhaustible well of cool ideas for shows and movies. And I think that's the root cause for a lot of these superhero movies and shows failing utterly, because you don't have people actually reading the source material. Like if you read the Secret Invasion comic book series like 12, 13 years ago and watched the show, you'd be like, all right, well, apart from the name, what do these have in common? And only now, thanks to that new book about Marvel Studios, are we starting to learn that Kevin Feige is basically like a filthy casual or kind of a poser when it comes to Marvel Comics. He was always a Star Wars guy, but he was never a big Marvel Comics reader. And when it comes to the Marvel Comics stories that he's familiar with, oftentimes that was due to people sliding him a trade paperback and saying, hey, you know what? This story arc about the Winter Soldier is pretty cool. Like maybe that might make a cool flick. But there's a reason why so many great stories from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s are being totally ignored by the big two right now when it comes to Marvel and DC movies, because you have so few people that are actually willing to read them. And sadly, it seems like Kevin Feige is hell-bent upon adapting some of the least popular comic book stories of all time, namely Marvel stories from like the last 6 or 7 years. But I don't want to turn this into a video about Marvel Studios. Let's focus on Invincible. But in the case of Invincible, the creator of the show, the producer of the show, happens to be the guy who wrote every single issue of the comic. And so, surprise, surprise, huge shocker, the show is actually pretty satisfying for fans of the comics. And I hate that conventional wisdom that in order to make these kinds of stories more accessible to a wider audience, that you need to dumb them down or defang them or declaw them. I find that to be total, complete bullshit. I feel like the best approach is always to make a show or a movie that's more or less faithful to the spirit of the source material and then invite everybody to come along for the ride. But first and foremost, you got to get the core, you got to get the DNA of the story correct. And speaking of story, I can't share any spoilers in this video, but what I can say is that if you happen to have read this trade, and especially this trade paperback, you're going to be a very, very happy fan. Basically, issues 14 to 29, they don't adapt all of it, but they adapt certain storylines and certain plot lines within those 15 issues incredibly well. And they seem to be like more or less shoving like 2 or 3 issues in per episode. But what's interesting is how, if you're familiar with the character of Angstrom, he's an absolutely fascinating character from the comics, but originally his origin story kind of took place in bits and pieces over many issues before he finally got the big payoff about the character that he was going to turn out to be. But what's cool here is how they basically take all those little teases across all those different issues and they just kind of stir them all together into one really good fucking episode. I would argue that episode 1 of this season and episode 4 of this season might be some of the most comic books accurate storytelling that I've ever seen on the small screen or big screen ever. And obviously television, that's a completely different medium from comics. But it just blew my mind how many lines of dialogue and how many iconic shots made its way into the show. And here's the good news. At their current burn rate, this show could go for fucking years because if you take all the comics together that I've read of Invincible, I've got all these bad boys, which I think took me up to like 120 or 115, and then for a while I was buying single standalone issues, but I actually haven't read all of Invincible. It actually went for a few more story arcs beyond when I kind of checked out. So if they maintain their current pace, by the time we get to the end of part 2 of season 2 next year, maybe we'll be around like issue 45 or so, which would mean we still got like at least 100 issues left to go. So if you're an Invincible fan, rest assured there's still plenty of story left to be told. And if this show were being run by a conventional producer who had no love and affection for the source material, what they would probably do is say, all right, let's take all the major story beats from the entire arc, kind of stir them together, get 2 or 3 seasons, and then, wash our hands and we're done. But I love how Robert Kirkman's like, you know what? Like, I wrote this shit. I know which story beats and which characters are important. We're going to slow down and get it right. And also, after the success of Walking Dead, if Robert Kirkman doesn't have the freedom to tell the story exactly the way he wants, like, what's the point of creating a hit show if it doesn't give you the freedom to tell your stories the way you like to? Also, quick reminder, if you're absolutely chomping at the bit to start watching season 2 right now, there's a chance that you might have missed a little prequel special which came out over the summer called Invincible Adam Eve. I love the character of Adam Eve, and it's basically like a standalone 1 hour, like almost kind of miniature feature film just about the character of Adam Eve. So if you've not yet seen that, you don't have to have seen that for season 2, but why not? I mean, one of the major fight scenes in the latter half of that episode is just fucking astonishing. And I think the same holds true for season 2, part 1. When it's great, it kicks ass. Like, the story definitely sags here and there, especially in episodes 2 and 3. I don't necessarily recommend binging it. Like, savor it and enjoy it. Watch it one episode at a time. And also, it's only 4 45-minute episodes, which is basically like a 3-hour feature film. But it's going to feel kind of like an appetizer for a much larger season. And another word of warning, there are hidden scenes after the credits of 3 of the 4 episodes coming out this Friday. So don't just let your app kind of skip ahead to what's coming next. Stick around, watch the hidden scenes, because oftentimes the hidden scenes are some of the best scenes that this show has to offer. And I think by the time a lot of people see episode 4 on Friday, it's going to absolutely melt some quarters of the internet. But it's going to be joy kind of mingled with a little frustration, because I think a lot of people are going to see that, people who have read the comic, and be like, how come everybody doesn't do this? Like, how come every filmmaker doesn't like find like the best story arcs of the best characters and try to adapt them accurately, really hammering home the best beats? Like, you don't need to update for modern audiences, although this show periodically, more so in season 1, but less so in season 2, does try to update for modern audiences. And I would argue those are the biggest flaws of the show. Like, every time I hear a review or see a review or read a review of Invincible, everyone always says, oh my God, this show's amazing. But how come Amber has to be so annoying? And I just find that to be absolutely hilarious. But I will say this, Amber is much more interesting as a character in season 2. I don't know if they listened to the feedback or just realized, you know what, maybe we're overdoing it a tad when it comes to her incessant kind of do-gooder activism and lectures and so on and so forth. And that might sound strange in a review of a show about superheroes, because superheroes are do-gooders. But I think what sometimes gets lost is the tone. Because if you get the tone wrong, you can come across like a shrieking harpy. It's like sitting down to eat a cheeseburger and like some family member's like, like by eating that hamburger, you orphaned 3 calves. You're like, fuck off. Just let me enjoy my goddamn cheeseburger. It just makes you want to pull your hair out and start screaming like goddamn, I'm trying to watch Omni-Man beat the crap out of Invincible. Just like, shut up for a fucking second. I'm happy to listen to your lecture, but maybe not this precise moment. And I feel like that was the problem with Amber in season 1, where she was updated for modern audiences, and it hurt the first season overall. But without giving anything away, all I'll say is that Amber is cooler and sexier and warmer and more interesting in season 2. The lectures aren't completely gone, but they've just been, they've taken their foot off the gas pedal. Like, all right, we are reaching an acceptable level of lecturing in this show. And along those lines, there are a few other flaws, like the subplots involving Adam Eve and the subplots involving Mark's mother. Some of them are more interesting than others, but if you were to look for, I wouldn't say dead weight, but if you were to look for scenes or like moments where the show feels like it's kind of like screeching to a halt or kind of tapping the brakes or slowing down the momentum, usually it's with the subplots involving those characters. And once again, it's a comic book, it's a soap opera, it's permanent second act storytelling. Tell as many subplots as you like, but you really got to put your best foot forward. Mark's storylines in all 4 episodes, you're like, God damn, like this is superhero genre storytelling at its best. And if your idea of a good time is watching characters like Invincible or the Mauler twins or Omni-Man or Adam Eve or Alan the Alien or any of these great characters, if your idea of a good time is watching them like enjoying tales of high adventure where they get to absolutely beat 7 shades of shit out of people, yeah, this season 2 part 1 will deliver on that front. And as far as the cast is concerned, we have a lot of familiar faces and we have a lot of new faces. Don't know how much of this is a spoiler. I guess if I don't mention character names, then it won't come across like a spoiler. But you know what? I don't want to get myself into trouble. All I'll say is that all the characters you know and love from season 1 are back, but there are a few new surprises in season 2 where I was like, God damn, like that is an excellent addition to the cast. And I'm pretty sure that the full cast list has been published on a few sites. So if you're very curious, hunt down those sites. But going back to the question of whether or not classic comics should be updated for modern audiences, this show does a weird thing where it does make some updates and some changes. And sometimes they're dramatically for the better, and sometimes they are dramatically for the worse. Like, as I mentioned before, the season 1 finale where Omni-Man and Invincible throw down went way beyond the original comic. I was like, wow, because usually when people talk about updating stuff for modern audiences, the traffic only goes one way. Like, let's tone down the violence. Let's race swap all the characters. Let's gender swap all the characters. Let's add in the political lectures. Like, that's what they mean by updating for modern audiences. Like, take out all the sex and violence and make it more political. This show does a little bit of that, but it also adds all this crazy stuff like, whoa, y'all made that scene really sexual. Whoa, y'all made that scene really violent. So maybe Invincible is one of the best examples of how to quote unquote update while at the same time not completely destroying what came before. And a perfect example on this front is how they adapt the storyline from issue 15. And this is not a spoiler if you've not seen the show, because you have no idea what the fuck issue 15 is. And if you've already read issue 15, well then it's not a spoiler. But all I'll say is that the storyline for 15 was heavily modified in one respect to, how can I say this? I'll just say to modernize the storyline, but at the same time added in additional violence that made it all the more exciting. And so they're trying to basically find a way to like have their cake and eat it too. And I think it's interesting to see, and like, how do you tell stories in 2023 based on stories that might be 20, 25 years old, or actually, I guess maybe like 15 or 20 years old in the case of Invincible? Like, what alterations are necessary, if any? And without specifying how or why, let me say this. What I found to be brilliant about this season was showing how people who have that incessant compulsive need to feel like or act like a do-gooder at all hours, this season actually shows how sometimes they're actually wrong. It's like sometimes the road to hell truly is paved with good intentions, where even if you have the best intentions in terms of trying to I'm just going to make something up, like, save people in a certain environment by offering them food, shelter, whatever the case might be, that out of just naivete and ignorance, that you actually might cause horrible problems or have unintended consequences through your do-gooder impulse. I was like, hey, it's like, that's actually kind of an interesting twist, showing how even people who are pure and noble right down to their core, they make mistakes, they fuck up, and those mistakes can have massive, horrible consequences for the people that they're trying to save. And my last note is both a compliment as well as a criticism, because this season, like last season, makes extensive use of musical montages where basically you'll see Mark, aka Invincible, flying around, beating the crap out of people, while a cool tune by someone like Radiohead will play in the background. And some of these montages are absolutely sublime, where the show's doing something that the comic can't do, because obviously when you're reading a comic, unless you're playing music, There's no musical montage. It's just television is a different form of storytelling from comics. And I was really impressed where the show started to feel genuinely cinematic and epic at times. Like, God damn, like, is this the best goddamn superhero show going on right now? Like, it just makes so much of the current output by Marvel and DC feel so irrelevant and so off base and so kind of misguided in its intentions, where it's like, just get back to what made these stories amazing in the first place. Trust in what made these comics cool. But, when it comes to these musical montages, you could probably make a case that perhaps this show overly relies on them from time to time. I can't remember which episode it was, but they got to a point where it was like the third musical montage in a single episode. I was like, all right, is this Rocky IV or is this Invincible? And Rocky IV is famous because it has like so many musical montages that it basically turns into like a series of different musical videos where you've got a little dialogue in between. And, you know, age 9 in the theater, I thought Rocky IV was fucking killer. I still think Rocky IV is killer, but if you were to criticize the movie, you might say maybe less or one fewer musical montages. Like maybe you've done your duty on that front. This show falls into that trap as well. However, I think most people will enjoy the musical montages just because the action's great and the music's great. So just as a way of wrapping up, I just want to reiterate, episode 4 this season is really special. If you were to try to like list all the comic books accurate movies and shows out there, where like they really like went back to basics and tried to do the most faithful adaptation possible, some of the more obvious examples would be like 300, which was an incredibly faithful adaptation of Frank Miller's original coffee table book, a movie obviously made by Zack Snyder, and he would do a similar approach with some alterations for The Watchmen a few years later. Like, those are great comic books accurate adaptations. And Winter Soldier, Captain America Winter Soldier in 2014, it borrowed heavily from Ed Brubaker and Steve Epting's classic storyline. Like, it took the spirit and the characters and some of the beats. It wasn't like a blow by blow because the original story was like 13 issues. But I thought that was a pretty good adaptation of a classic storyline. But there are not a lot of great examples. And here's another trend that I've noticed as of late, which ruins the potential for adapting these great storylines, where a movie or a show will take a certain detail, like the armor that Batman wore in The Dark Knight Returns, which Zack Snyder then put in Batman v Superman. Like, it looks cool on film. You can tell, like, oh, like, I love that comic, so I want to have that armor in the movie. But then you basically burn to the ground the possibility or the potential for doing The Dark Knight Returns in live action without it seeming derivative or kind of like overly familiar, or shoving Doomsday into that movie. It's like, well, then now you've burned to the ground the possibility of ever doing the Death of Superman properly. So it's like, don't just take like a little detail or a character or a costume. Like, do the whole thing or leave it alone. And I feel like, yeah, if you're looking for a faithful, loving adaptation of a really cool comic, yeah, Invincible, it's basically as good as it gets. And as I'm talking about this, I'm getting an idea for a video of like top 10 comic book storylines that can never be adapted into live action because they've already been ruined by other filmmakers kind of like pillaging little details. Like, a perfect example is going to be Daredevil Born Again. Daredevil Born Again is 5 issues from Daredevil, written by Frank Miller, drawn by David Mazzucchelli in the 1980s, and maybe like the best 5-issue arc that you will ever read, like in any way, shape, or form in the world of comics. But little details have already been kind of plucked out and pulled out, and so it's like, can you even do a faithful adaptation of the original Daredevil Born Again storyline? Because season 3 of Daredevil started kind of just like, oh, I'll take this. It's like, either do it or leave it alone. But I feel like there are a lot of storylines out there, like the Kree-Skrull War, written by Roy Thomas and drawn by Neil Adams and I think Sal Buscema. Between all of them, they did the entire Kree-Skrull War in the early 70s. But like, little details have already been taken out. So it's like, could you even do the Kree-Skrull War, or has it already been ruined by stupid shows like Secret Invasions? So that's another topic for another day. For now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video. But rest assured, if you loved all the violence and heart and humanity and all the characters and just the visual style of season 1, you're going to enjoy season 2, or at least the 4 episodes that have been made available so far. And if people go crazy on Friday, maybe I'll come back with a spoiler review like over the weekend. But that depends upon how popular the show turns out to be, because that's a lot of effort, and you don't want to put all that effort into a video if people aren't talking about and watching the show. So let's see how popular it will be. But thank you so much for now for watching my rant and my review. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. But I hope everybody has a great week. Hope everybody enjoys Invincible Season 2 Part 1. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.